Hello everyone. It's nice to see you all your pixels up there on the screen. My name is Ajahn Cunda, and Ajahn introduced me yesterday. He's one of the monks who lives here. So there are some questions, but not many. I was given a tough slot the first day. There are 3 questions here, and I'll do what I can to flesh them out. So the first one is, I would appreciate any suggestions for working with intense feelings of resentment, ill will, and hostility that sometimes arise towards those from whom I have received harm. Thank you. So as Ajahn was pointing out, the hindrances, ill will is the second one, and this is just anger, aversion, negativity, and so it's a common hindrance. I'd be surprised if there was somebody who had never experienced this before. So we're most of us are quite used to this. It might not be our go-to hindrance. Each of us has particular propensities. They're quite impersonal, but even though we're impersonal, we might beat ourselves up about it. Why am I like this or like that? So yes, this being quite common, it's something that comes up for us, especially around other people. In this particular question, it's about being harmed by another person. And I've reflected on this sometimes. I'm not sure how many of you have this similar experience, but I often, when I feel ill will or aversion towards other people, the thought I have in mind is, well, if he or she didn't think negatively about me, I really wouldn't have a problem with them. So it's often this feeling of harm or injustice towards oneself that spurs on this feeling of ill will. And so it's very natural. Probably comes about when most of us are quite young, and we have to deal with things that aren't fair or unjust, or where we think we've been treated unfairly by another person. And just to remember that it's just a very common experience. And it's not one that, in terms of this person asking this, that you're probably alone with having. So just something to remember is that, okay, this isn't, as I mentioned, the impersonal, this isn't just me. This is experiences that many people have. Yet we can feel that we shouldn't have feelings of resentment or ill will. We should be free of that. And so this is an expectation we often place on ourselves. Why me? Why am I like this? I shouldn't be like this. I should be different. Or why is it so extreme for me? And even though that's a common question, it's not very useful. It's not useful to kind of think of it as me and mine. This is again, personalizing, creating a self out of it. I'm the angry person. I'm the one with so much ill will and resentment. I remember one winter retreat I had in Canada. I was on my own for pretty much 3 months, and had an opportunity to just, no schedule, nothing to attend to except our once every 2 week rule recitation that we do as bhikkhus. And, what bliss. And it definitely wasn't that. So there was a lot of ill will, especially towards one of my family members. And I was just amazed at how long it could continue, and how much of an effect it had on my mind. You'd think that the mind would get bored, or think that it just wasn't worth, it just would get exhausted, or tired of expressing ill will. But it didn't. Same story playing over and over again. So what helped me with this was, sorry to use the Buddhist cliche, but was metta. And I just started to first resonate with my own suffering, the sense of how much dukkha there was in my own experience of feeling this ill will and anger. And with that, I could recognize, okay, this isn't very useful. It's not very kind to myself to allow the mind to move in this direction, even though at times there was a feeling like there wasn't much control. So there was a dual aspect of, accepting that there wasn't always that much control involved in this kind of thing. Another aspect was that, again, that it was very impersonal. This was, we could say, karma that was arising. And then the other aspect was, how can this be healed? How can this be kind of, can a Band-Aid be put on this, or an ointment or something that can deal with the negativity and the sense of unwholesomeness that I was experiencing. And so I did start with myself, wishing myself well, using typical metta phrases. May I be happy, may I be peaceful, may I be calm. I'd say things like, may no harm come to me, may no difficulty come to me, may I be free from negativity, jealousy, and ill will, may I be filled with positivity, gladness, and goodwill. And on these statements went, and they just had a very cooling and calming effect, even though it wasn't always consistent. Sometimes the ill will or negativity would overpower the metta. But in general, the more I engaged with this, the less ill will was felt, and then I could genuinely feel that calm and peace arise. And it was like pouring water on like a piece of metal that was extremely hot, that sizzling that occurred. But eventually the sizzling went away, and then there was just steam, and then that metal cooled down. And once it cooled down, then I could work on wishing well to the family member I was having difficulty with, and on it went. So this might seem obvious, but there can sometimes be a lot of resistance to metta. It might not work. There might be feelings that, I'm not really worthy of my own well-wishing to myself. But I kind of believe the Buddha when he said that there is no one more worthy of metta than yourself. And it's something that is a skill one learns. It's something that can be learned through practice. And it's important to try that kind of practice out. It's important to work at it, and also to work on the expectation, that this will have immediate results, because it probably won't, unless you're skilled at metta. So I think that's there's no quick fix here with ill will, but that is one way in the long run, if one practices what the Buddha teaches as metta, and does so in a way that's, really opening the heart to these difficult and negative experiences, these unwholesome experiences. That is quite, can be quite useful and helpful. I would also say just don't get too downhearted about if there's a repetitive nature around this anger or resentment, and just to again realize that this is a human experience. It's very normal. The Buddha recognizes one of the 5 hindrances. It's sort of the top 5 unwholesome experiences, and so it's just something that we are working on. It's an aspect of our practice that we're trying to examine, explore, look at, and most importantly, learn from, rather than wish away. We don't want to look at this thing as, may I never experience ill will. That would be nice, but the reality is, it's something that we will experience, and it's also something that we can learn about. So we'll go through it, we'll experience it, and it can be the dukkha that leads to the end of dukkha, if we're willing to be with this very painful emotion. So normally with question and answers, I'd be able to ask some questions of the person who's asking, but I don't have that opportunity here. So I might touch in again with that later, but I think that's good for now. One of the questions here is about the role of merit in one's practice. And it says, can you speak about the role of merit in one's practice as a layperson who is practicing for liberation? Why are people in Asian countries more oriented towards making merit than in the US? Are we missing something? Yeah, you're missing something. So the Buddha had a lot of aspects to how he taught the Dhamma and how he encouraged those who practiced. And for those of you who are aware of his teachings, have read, you'll say, wow, it can be a little overwhelming. I definitely wouldn't say underwhelming. It's just like there are so many ways to cultivate the Dhamma. And this is one of the ways that the Buddha spoke about with punya, being merit-making. So the idea of merit is we are gaining in, or my understanding of it is that we are gaining in the wholesome when we move our minds, our intentions towards the wholesome. We are sort of, in certain ways, perfecting our minds. We are accumulating good deeds, good actions, essentially good habits. And this has an effect that on our life in general. It brings about goodness, and it's something that we can dedicate to others, we can offer to others. But it's not. It's often been compared to like a bank account, like you're getting a lot of good karma, you're accumulating a lot of good action. And so eventually you can be spendy with that bank account. But it's not exactly like that. It's not like we're gaining in a bank account, because when you have a bank account, then if you spend the money in that bank account, then you lose, or that money depreciates, it goes down, right? So you get a big fancy electric car, and now you have no money in your account. So it doesn't work like that. Merit is something that you accumulate, and so in terms of the goodness within you, the wholesome intentions within you, based on how you are cultivating the Dhamma, But there can be a dedication that you can make. You can wish for others to share in the goodness that you have received. And the nice thing about that is that's an act of generosity, but it's also an act of what's called chaga, so it's like your willingness to give something up. And that very act doesn't depreciate your goodness, it increases it. So we can say, for whatever benefit that I have made through the good actions I've done, I dedicate that, I offer that to my loved ones, my friends, this person who's in trouble. It's said that merit can directly benefit those who are in the ghostly realm, the ghost realm. So this is a positive way one can offer up what one has received from the goodness of one's own actions to others. And so it's essentially a way to decrease our selfishness, to really have a good sense of not just keeping it all for ourselves. And so that's what I would say, yes, if one isn't kind of at least thinking about that, it doesn't even necessarily have to come from belief, then you can be missing something in your practice. So just kind of think about like someone who's, as this is saying, practicing for liberation. It's true that is the reason we're practicing, but if we don't see this as also a benefit for other people, our activities, what we're doing, then we are indeed missing something. Because we might not see very clearly that we're just holding it in for ourselves. It becomes me and my practice, what I have to do for myself, and we can lose other people in that. And so that's why it's so important to include others in our practice, and to also know that this is said to be a benefit when we dedicate the goodness that we've received to others. This is actually, according to the Buddha's teaching, something that can benefit others, and so we're willing to share. But again, it doesn't take away. It's not like, by saying like, may all the goodness that I've received from the practice that I've done, from the good things that I've done, the goodness and the good actions, I dedicate that to my, maybe it could be your mother, your father, your sisters, brothers, friends, people who are in need. And just the very dedication of that brings a lot of fulfillment and warmth to the heart. So it's quite just beneficial. You can feel it because you're willing to give up that goodness, dedicate that merit that you've received to another person. And so it's sort of like doubling down, I would say. You're actually making good on your goodness. And so it has that sort of doubling effect. And I think that's why people do it, why people are engaging in that. And specifically when you mentioned people from Asian countries, there is a very strong belief in this custom, that there is a benefit to others, but there's also a belief that it's benefiting oneself. I would just encourage the questioner here to kind of practice with it, to think of another person and being willing to dedicate the goodness you've received to others in your life, and see what that does for you. See if that works. There might be some sort of blockage or something that is occurring that's not allowing you to want to do that, or you might think, oh, this is stupid, I don't really see the point. But look to yourself. If you think about how others might be dedicating the merit to you. I mean, what if you found that out one day? You're like, oh yeah, for the past 10 years, every day I've been dedicating all the goodness that I've received in my life to you. really? To me? And so that might be quite a bit of a surprise. You might feel kind of, that might promote a little bit of good feelings. You might feel guilty about it. I don't know what would come up, but it's just something to think about. If you're questioning this whole idea, then just think about what it might be like for you to receive the same from another. This also helps us build on our relationships with our family members and friends, those who have benefited us. It makes that a very real relationship of goodness. So we're reminded of that. And I remember one person mentioned a long time ago, I remember it was a statement, I can get extremely depressed in my life, but when I think about all of the people who've lived before me, perhaps 2,500 years before the Buddha's time, and dedicated the merit of their life, and as I mentioned with metta, also wished metta for all the beings yet to be born, I become happy in knowing that has been given to me, that has been offered to me. So you just think about that accumulated giving. If everyone around the planet did this, dedicated their own goodness, they wish people metta, practice the Brahmaviharas for others, how much that could really change the world. A lot of the times what the monks are doing is a similar thing with our Anumodana chanting. We are wishing through the goodness of our own practice, may that benefit those who've come to make offerings to us. And it's just an important aspect of our own lives as monastics as well. So there is a third question here. And it's not a very easy question. So I'll do my best to answer it as best I can. But we'll see what comes out. So this morning Ajahn Yaniko spoke about the nutriments. Can you talk more about them in terms of Dhamma teachings and practice? Thank you. So this is a specific teaching about the Buddha, and he, basically talks about 4 nutriments that are the aim of our craving. They are quite specific, he mentioned them, but they are born out of our craving, or what we crave for. So first I'd like to just suggest, put a seed in your minds, like, well, what do you think the 4 nutriments are if you don't know them? What do you think that we are seeking nutriment? What are we chewing on? What is it that we are seeking, always trying to get? You can just imagine that for yourself. So the Buddha said that the first one is pretty easy. It's something that revolves around our life a lot. And so much so that the Buddha said, hey, let's kind of curb this a little bit with the 8 precepts. He said, not eating at the wrong time. So one of the foundational things is food. We seek nutriment in food. So it's edible food. So that's a pretty easy one. But then the other 3 are more subtle. They're obvious, but they're quite subtle. So the first one is sense impression. and this is specifically the sort of mental, the mental senses that we kind of look at, mental contact that we seek from, or in regards to the six sense objects. So, and so these are activated by feeling. And if you can think about in your life how motivated you are to really seek sense impressions, mental impressions from your senses, then you can kind of bring that up, whether it's visual, auditory, smell or taste, touch, or just the machinations of your own mind. We're constantly seeking that mental contact. And so yeah, that's kind of that's the second nutriment. The third one is it's really like again, it kind of is in the realm of thought. So it's like volitional thought, our intentions, and it has a lot to do with karma and our sort of like intentions towards good and evil, or like wholesome and unwholesome. It's our actions. It's where our mind moves for our actions. And sort of like, if you think about like just all the doing, the planning, the things you want to do, things you want to undo, all of that that comes up in the mind, that's essentially the third nutriment. And the last one is more subtle. It's difficult to kind of pin down, but it's consciousness. And if you think about what the Buddha might mean by consciousness, it's in this regard, it's specifically rebirth consciousness. So it's the desire that we have to just be aware beings, to be conscious beings. And that is what actually conditions our rebirth. Even just, it's like a momentary, it's like a momentary consciousness that brings us to life after life after life, just being reborn again and again and again. And so those are the four nutriments. And we're consistently kind of moving in that realm. We're kind of trying to kind of constantly eat something, get something out of something else. And if you think about this in your own life, you know how much you're motivated towards food as the first nutriment. So it's like just think about how much that comes up in your mind. You know, the hunger, satisfying taste, looking to get the next bite until you're satiated, and then your mind starts to look for other nutriments, other things that it can eat out there. So when you can't consume food anymore, you might still be interested in what food might look like or something like that. But eventually you might be satiated, you'll look for other sense impressions. But the Buddha, I think, separated this out, edible food, because it really was something that we feed on a lot. You can see that when you walk through the buffet table that Ajahn was talking about, the food that is kindly offered to us each day, and watch that whole experience. The bell rings, what that conjures up. Seeing food, smelling food. Even right now as I'm talking about it, you might still be full for a meal, but what does that do to the mind? You go to a restaurant, you have a choice of what you're going to eat. You look down and you see all these choices, and oh, maybe I want that. Oh no, no, that's not good enough. I think I'd rather, if I could just have 2 of these. And so that's where the mind can often go. So it's something that's so basic to our lives that the Buddha really forewarned us to try to get a handle on it, to realize that we're seeking these nutriments. They're so much a part of our life. We can get very obsessed by them and not see the dukkha in our kind of need to consume, our need to seek nutriment. Sense impressions is another obvious one. Is, you look at the word like clickbait. So the sense that we're seeking, like in that term, like a visual object, and just if we see something that's just mildly distracting, we just immediately click on it. You have to see it. We get allured by different sounds, smells, and we're filling the mind up with these things. We fill the mind up with even our thoughts. We get kind of deluded and enchanted by our own thought process. And this is a sense impression that we get. So the Buddha likened this to like a skinned cow. So he didn't actually think this was a good thing. There's a skinned cow might wander here and there and it would be constantly impinged upon by the cool or the heat or insects. It would just be in consistent pain because it would have these sense impressions hitting it all the time. It can't get away from them. And just like that cow, we have the same experience. Even though we might have some delight from these sense impressions, they're ultimately painful because they're born out of craving. And we continue to seek them over and over and over again. This other nutriment that the Buddha talks about with volitional thought, our karmic intentions. This is something that we also are nutrifying our experience with. We're seeking out. This is just all the constant movements of the mind towards planning and doing activity, and it's just like, it's karmic rebirth. It's sort of the activities that we fill our lives with to know that we're alive. And this is something we can often be not so aware of that we're doing or that we're seeking out. Something that's born out of craving. It just seems so normal and natural for us to think of just all of the plans that I have, how this retreat is going to go for me, how it's going right now. Is it good enough? Do I understand these teachers? Just the constant thoughts that we have. We're just always moving in some particular thought direction. This way that the Buddha talks about volitions or intentions. So again, the other, the last nutriment is not so. It's pretty subtle. The sort of rebirth consciousness. In specifically talking about rebirth consciousness rather than consciousness, the Buddha is talking about that craving for, again, like being an aware, having like an experience of being conscious, having awareness. This is why when, according to how the Buddha teaches, when we die, we take up another life because of this craving for rebirth consciousness. And in fact, I think it's one of the things that a lot of people talk about there when they talk about fear of death. Talk about why I can't imagine just not being aware anymore, not being conscious. So there's this great fear of what it would be like to not have this rebirth consciousness. And so we cling to it. We need it. We still want it. Think about when you get out of bed, you rise, the alarm rings, and just immediately these sort of volitional formations start, and we just delight in that being, that sense of consciousness, that sense of me that I'm creating and continuing to create. And it's what, it's what arises, it's what's conditioning us. And we're craving it. We're craving that awareness, that consciousness that we have. So in teaching about this, the Buddha is bringing up he brings up many similes in this aspect, but it's really about that word that I appreciate that he chose in this aspect, which is nutriment. We're seeking something to nutrify us, and unfortunately, in the role of the four nutriments, because it's born out of craving, and those four that I listed they're not actually wholesome. They're not wholesome movements of mind. When we seek them, when we have craving for them, we're conditioning ourselves to be continually moving in samsara and reborn into samsara. And so when the Buddha talks about them because it's an opportunity to see, like, okay, how am I actually engaging with these four nutriments in my life? And so it's another way that the Buddha divides up experience in terms of a way for you to analyze your experience. And again, with all of the Buddha's teachings, there are so many, it can seem overwhelming, but this is a tool that he's pointing out. It's also what he determined, what he understood from his own mind. But it's a tool for you to analyze craving and what craving is seeking. What are you gnawing on? What is it that is particularly being picked up on by your experience, what it is you're experiencing? And before I mentioned these, I had asked you to imagine what these things were, what these nutriments were. And I'm not sure how many of you either had a sense of them before I mentioned them, or you kind of guessed right or not. But either way, I would encourage you to try to practice with them and try to understand them. As Ajahn was talking about this being a theme of anapanasati, then we're drawing on the breath to understand our own mind. So when I first came to the monastery, I just thought, as some people do, that, well, if you just watch the in and out breath for 30 years and you don't have to ask any questions or analyze anything or even think about anything, you just watch the breath and you'll feel peaceful and then you'll get enlightened. But that's not how the Buddha taught. The Buddha said, he really taught, wait a minute, there's a lot more to it than that. And that's why these nikayas, suttas, there's so many teachings, because there's so many nuances to the mind, and there's so many ways that the Buddha said, hey, try and think about it this way, or try and think about it that way, or look at it from this result, or that cause. And so analyzing your experience from how craving manifests and how it is moving towards seeking, like consuming, gnawing on something, chewing on something. That's a really good analysis you can put forth in your practice. So as you're working with the breath and you're experiencing the breath, there will be times when you might feel quite focused and there's less distraction. Then you might bring up one of these nutriments. You might analyze this. Say, what's the mind what's the flavor of the mind right now? Because even if there is an experience of in and out breathing that is quite calm and peaceful, you might see how subtle this very craving is. The outgoing sense of it. There might be a sense of examining the breath and wanting to get something out of it. Wanting to get a sense impression out of it. Oh, I hope I have some really calm aspect. I hope my body feels light and peaceful, and maybe I'll get into the first jhana, and that'll be such an interesting experience. And that's it. That's like all of them right there. You have the sense impression, you have the volition, the intention right there, and again, you also have that rebirth consciousness. I want this experience. I want to have this experience. And so we can realize that we're craving. We're still craving. We're still trying to get something. And that can often be subtle and hard to see, and it can also be obstructive to what it is we're doing. And so I think it's quite important to explore that within your own practice, because a lot of people they hit walls, and the wall that you're often hitting is you're hitting it because craving is still informing how you're pointing your mind. How you're practicing with your meditation object. It's craving that is kind of still moving you in a direction that is causing you to hit a wall. Because again, you're often, and I can see this in my own practice, I'm trying to get something out of it, trying to get an experience, rather than have a motivation for learning or understanding. So I think that's pretty much it. Somehow I got to talk about 3 questions and made a fair amount of it.